Greetings, friends. Thank you very much for being here today. We just heard Ed Asner, and there's not a lot more that I can say about the importance of us being involved and still keeping the torch burning almost 20 years now. I had the great honor to be out here a couple years ago, and the Muga family hosted us at their house. Maybe a number of you were there. It was quite a wonderful experience, and I realized at that time how important San Diego is and the grassroots interest, participation, and passion for this important issue of 9/11 truth. Now, I said I have a few slides of myself. This is when I got sworn in as a police officer. Now, being in the military, being a police officer, you basically swear to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. Now, I've done it not once as a soldier, not twice as a police officer, but 3 times as an attorney also. So it means a lot to me when I speak about the Constitution and our Bill of Rights. I can't think of anything more precious than that document and those rights to protect and defend for ourselves and our children, our family, our friends, and actually for the best interest of the world. So the various pictures up there is a swearing the allegiance. The second one is a picture of myself, and the third one is I was a whistleblower as a police officer. I defended a family was burned out, shot at, and robbed. It was an African-American family. My lead took me to the police director's first cousin, best man at his wedding. And when I went and let the investigation basically be diverted, I was fired. And I fought them, I won, got my job back, set up an organization, Taxpayers and Tenants Association, and a newspaper, New Brunswick Reporter. And eventually I found good people in the New Jersey State Police Organized Crime Unit, and then I found a wonderful FBI agent, and I worked with him for 2 years. And they came in and they arrested a number of local politicians, including the police director. He was indicted, along with the city attorney, along with the former head of the Democratic Party, and along with some other big shots who decided to turn evidence for the state. So that's that, and that was a settlement to get my job back. Let's see if I go to the next slide. Okay, this is about 4 or 5 years ago. I'm with a good friend of mine, Pamela Sensei. She's dedicated also to the Constitution and trying to get us on the right track. So what we decided to do was to hike from Shanksville, Pennsylvania, in that area where the United 93 crashed, and with backpacks and film gear, and to do the route of the crime scenes, starting in Pennsylvania. So we hiked the backwoods of Pennsylvania with bear spray and snake out. Second day, we saw a big rattlesnake right near us. And when we camped, we put that snake out. It smells like mothballs around the tent. We went to some really humid area in western Maryland, down to Potomac. We were on George Washington's Potomac all the way down to Washington, about 220 miles from the Shanksville area to Washington, actually the Watergate Hotel. We met a guy down there named Lou Wolf. If you don't know Lou Wolf, he's quite an amazing person, and he's written a lot of, he used to have a magazine that exposed a lot of corruption with the CIA and things of that nature, and other people down there. And then we changed gear, and we did probably the more difficult part of the hike. We trekked the highways from Washington, D.C., up through Baltimore, Wilmington, Philadelphia, crossed into New Jersey, then up eventually to the George Washington Bridge, over the bridge, and then down to Ground Zero. And a lot of people don't realize when you cross the George Washington Bridge, you're in Upper Manhattan. You still got 10 miles to go to get down to Ground Zero. All right. So we did that. It took about 7 weeks. It was hard. It was sweaty. It was drudgery, but it was in a lot of ways very fulfilling. And of course, you know, a lot of people could do a lot quicker probably, But we filmed. Pam made a doc. We have a film on it, the first part, and she's working on the second part. The second part probably be more extensive. What we did is we talked to people as we went, asking them what they thought about 9/11, just getting their insights and their feelings. So now, let's see. Okay, there you go. There's the guy, Ed Asner, and you heard him at the beginning. Now, Ed Asner is just not an entertainer, as you know that. He's a human rights activist, and he is supporting issues that hardly anybody in the entertainment business, let alone in the legal business or law enforcement or any other profession, has the courage to do. He's calling a question as to the propriety of the investigation that happened in 9/11. So Ed Asner is quite an individual. Barbara, you have in the audience, and she's going to speak shortly. I'm going to introduce her. And she's an incredible woman. She worked at the high levels in the White House, and she's an incredible researcher, has written a remarkable book on the Iran-Contra affair from the Iranian point of view. So that's two of our board members. Now, this is Mick Harrison. Now, Mick is one of the best federal litigators in the country, I think. He's an expert whistleblower over 27 years. He's our litigation director. If we have a question on the case, we want to go forward with it, Mick's the person we're going to direct our attentions to, because that's his expertise, all right? So when we do these Freedom of Information Acts or the cases I'll be talking to you about, Mick has drawn those up with the assistance of other attorneys and with the board. When we do something, it's reviewed by the board and then approved. But Mick is basically the draftsman. And Jane Clark, she's a remarkable woman. She helped start the Lawyers Committee. She's from Texas, an attorney. And Bill Jacoby, a remarkable attorney down in New York State, all right? And he started the Truth Action Project, which some of you may know. And John O'Kelly, who didn't get me a picture yet. I told John we need a picture, and I guess he didn't have one, he wanted to share yet, like most of us, we want to get a better one. And I didn't get the picture yet, but certainly he deserves to be up there. Now, when I talk about 9/11, I like to try and put it into context, because we're coming into a situation that didn't happen yesterday, although it happened 18 years ago. And a lot has happened since that time, where before that time, none of these things happened. Now, as we look over this, and I'll just go around clockwise, over 1 million dead and injured, a lot of people dead and injured because of the consequences of 9/11. The Patriot Act, loss of civil liberties, the use of torture and drone warfare, the full spectrum dominance, trillions diverted to war profits, the increased domination by corporations, refugee crisis, immunity of high-level officials from war crimes, failure of government to uphold Constitution, economic decline for 95% of us, censorship of the media, increased power of the deep state, constant fear campaign, crackdown on whistleblowers, militarization of police, official cover-up, destabilization of Middle East and Afghanistan, clash of cultures, wars for empire, surveillance state, bulk data collection. As I mentioned before, the Constitution, so important, and its Bill of Rights, it's been shredded. It's been eviscerated since 9/11. And everything I mentioned previously, just the last slide, sort of confirms that. USA Patriot Act, the FISA courts. Homeland Security, indefinite detention. And here you go. Look hard on that. Now I can imagine the founding fathers, the Sons of Liberty, at their meetings. And the King of England wanting to quarter soldiers in their houses to keep an eye on them. And how they stood up to prevent that. And let's look at it again. Consequences of 9/11, indefinite detention. Citizens as enemy combatants. NSA surveillance 24/7 of all our text messages, emails, cell phone communications, and web searches. Now, I was just with Bill Binney, former NSA whistleblower, and Kurt Wiebe in New York last Saturday, New York City. They were making presentations at the Schiller Institute. And I know Bill from the last year or so. He's a friend of ours. He's addressed the Lawyers Committee. I know Kurt Wiebe too. Last year, September 7th, when we had our event at All Souls Church in New York City, which was quite a good event. Bill Binney was going to be there, had to get quadruple bypass last moment. And Kurt Wiebe filled in for him, so we Skyped him in. These are two outstanding NSA heroes or whistleblowers. And they're the ones that are telling us NSA surveillance 24/7, all our text messages, emails, cell phone communications, and web searches being harvested and stored at a facility in Utah, a giant facility, at our taxpayers' money. So again, we think back to the crimes of yesteryear during our colonial period, and our forefathers wouldn't even allow a soldier to come and squat in the house, but we have surveillance at all times now. And we'll go into it, G5 and things of that nature, but if you're into some of that 2030 technology, it's going to get worse if we don't address the problems we have. Okay. So, now, this is architects and engineers, I think, have brought this to light like no one else. And as they say, this is smoking gun. Certainly it is. Now, let's just look at this again, because I know we've all looked at it many times, many times. I wish the whole world would look at it. I wish especially Americans would look at it again and again and again. Because I'm going to show you the three towers coming down. Now, it's really important because the Lawyers Committee, our petition, a grand jury petition in New York City, which was filed with the U.S. Attorney April of 2018, and which we received a letter from him in November of 2018 saying, we've reviewed and read and reviewed your petition, and we will comply with the statute, 18 U.S.C. 3332A. They will comply. The statute is his responsibility is to present the evidence we gave him of controlled demolition in 57 exhibits, this being one in that area of Building 7, to a special grand jury. That's what he said he'd do. And in July, we called him, talked to Mike Ferreira, as his assistant, head of counterterrorism. He said he couldn't tell us anything because it's all secret under Rule 6, which is not totally true, because there are things you can tell, especially if there's ministerial records they can give you to indicate that there's some motion or movement in that area. And we told him, if you don't tell us, we have to sue you. We don't want to, we have to. And so we did sue him. And they were served in December. Now we're fighting out the issue in New York City right now. In the next few weeks, it might be determined about standing. So they had the state or the government came and said we didn't have the standing. Of course, we say we do. Now, we have an opportunity to amend our complaint. And we're going to amend it, and we're going to have super standing. All right? We're going to have real strong standing. Now, this is similar to what they did down in Washington, D.C., which I'll tell you a little bit about later about the standing issue. Okay? But let's just see if we can get this going. I hope so. Remember, I'm going to show you the 3 collapses.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the 3rd time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before when a building was deliberately destroyed by world-class dynamite to knock it down.
Okay, well that's the first one. You can see, I mean, it was hit by an airplane. It had, let's see the fires it had on it. Let's go down here a second. What does it say? It says, the collapse of WTC-7 is the first known instance of a tall building brought down primarily by uncontrolled fires. Okay, let's say if they're uncontrolled, that's the picture of the fires. It's only on a few floors. Realizing that this has never happened before. There are fires all the time in buildings. They just don't collapse because we know that. The steel doesn't melt. It has a high degree temperature. You need about 2800 to melt it. And office fires, they're only a few hundred, 400 or 500 degrees probably be high. Now if you put some jet fuel on it, it might be up to 1700, but that's a far cry for 2800. And you need it sustained it a while to sort of loosen it or melt it. But so this is, you're seeing some, oh no, think about it. You just saw something, let's look at it again, because you saw something which is actually a miracle. I mean it. We just saw something and it's a miracle because this can't happen. It just can't fall down. Not like the government said, can it? Let's look at it.
It's amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the 3rd time today.
Okay, so here we go. Now let's see, this is what it looks like. This was fire burnt for the longest time. I think it was over a day in China. And what did that building come down? No, that's the Mandarin Hotel. That's what it looked like. Didn't look good. Still standing though. Oh, the steel. Now here, let's look at Building 7 again. And you tell me if this doesn't look like something that Dan Rather was saying, it sort of seems like a controlled demolition. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm think too much. I don't know. What do you think? Does that look like controlled demolition? I mean, the left is the Building 7, right is the controlled demolition. Is that right? Left is the Building 7, right is a controlled demolition. Certainly looks like it's the same thing. I don't know. Maybe we all missed something. But when we come to the parameters with NIST, here's what they say. When they try to get figures, architects and engineers try to get releasing of the parameters for their animation. I think when we go forward with this slideshow, well, maybe you include that animation. It doesn't look anything like Building 7. But here's what they say as far as some of this material, the input that was asked for. It says that it may jeopardize public safety to release it. Therefore, NIST shall not release the following information. So, I mean, it seems like it would increase public safety if they would release it, but because it might jeopardize public safety, that's what they want. Okay. So why didn't the investigators look at the actual steel samples from the WTC-7? Their answer, steel samples were removed from the site before the NIST investigation began. All right. Now, you would think that, again, it's not just NIST's problem, it's the government's problem. It's everyone that was involved there. The protocols are to forensically study the evidence, to photograph it, to segregate it, to test it, to dust it, to do whatever you have to do to solve the problem or to detect what brought the buildings down. Especially in this type of situation, a catastrophic event like this, happening also in 1993, when there was, what happened to the buildings in 1993? Bombs went off in the North Tower in 1993. So less than 10 years later, now the whole building's come down. You think, the first thing you think about, was there explosives involved? And Shim Sunder, we're going to try to dig his clip up where he says, no, we didn't check for bombs. Why not? Nobody asked us to. Right, something to that effect. So that's what we're dealing with a little bit. Now, we're going to look at the different crime scenes of, okay, let's see if we can get this, oh, sorry. Now look at this. Does this look like a typical office fire? Or any?
The entire building has just collapsed as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it's folded down on itself and it is not there anymore.
That should be it.
It
Thanks
has
very much,
completely
Ed.
collapsed.
The whole side has
The
collapsed?
whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed?
The building has collapsed.
That's the southern tower you're talking about.
Exactly. The second building that we witnessed the airplane enter has been, the top half has been as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it's folded down on itself and it is, when you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it's folded down on itself and it is not there anymore.
Appeared into its own dust.
Look at that, okay? Now how can anyone say that was simple office fires that brought that down? If we showed that to the people in this country, I think there would be an awakening like you've never seen before if they just studied it, looked at it, thought through, compare what the government told them, listen to what scientists say you can do with an office fire, talk about free fall and things of that nature. And you just heard this narrator say about the demolition. Looks like a demolition. You heard Dan Rather saying, looks like controlled demolition. This is their spontaneous utterance in law. That would come in as evidence, a spontaneous utterance, because you don't think about it, you just react. So it's strong proof of evidence. When you just see something immediately, what's your impression? Ah, looks like an explosion. Looks like controlled demolition. Well, we got one more. I hate to show you, but let's see. So we know the South Tower was the first one hit around 9:03. It came down 9:59. Then the North Tower came down 10:28. That was hit about 8:48, I think. So this is the North Tower. All right, so we go to some of the science that was done here. Now, this was Stephen Jones and Nils Harrit. Exhibit number 1. If you go on lc4911.org, exhibit number 1 is this study. It's a 25-page study. It's done in color. It's quite remarkable. It was 4 areas in ground zero dust that was taken, sampled, and what they found in it was active thermetic material. All right, and this says here, discovered in dust from 9/11 World Trade Center catastrophe, and there's actual part of the nanothermite there that they found. All right. Now, this is never studied or looked at for explosives, and they didn't look for nanothermite. All right, now, what we say, the Lawyers Committee says that our petition is conclusive or dispositive of controlled demolition and explosives. Now, nanothermite certainly seems like it was involved. There could be other things involved, right? Could be other things like RDX and things of that nature. Need to be more explosive experts involved here to study the dust. But certainly nanothermite was something that was involved and should have been considered. Now, what did they do with the steel? I mean, this is evidence. What do you got to do with the evidence? Get rid of it? No, you're supposed to preserve it best you can. Anyway, they shipped it over to New Jersey and chopped it up and sent it overseas to China. Was one of the recipients. Now, here's where the Lawyers Committee is different from any other organization, at least as far as maybe a little different from architects and engineers. Architects and engineers has done a yeoman job in New York City, and they will be there until this crime is solved or resolved, as well as the Lawyers Committee. We're totally dedicated to New York, so we're not leaving New York. In fact, we're doing investigations and talking to people, and there's things I'm not privileged to tell you, but there's other stuff that eventually maybe come out of what we're looking at in New York City. But, as you know, there was other crime scenes. And from the Lawyers Committee perspective, we think all the crime scenes are important. So this one was especially, well, this is, all right, you have a really strange crime scene here. You have people saying they couldn't see any plane parts. You got the coroner being there and they didn't see any bodies right at the beginning. They never see any blood. Now, I've been up with Mick Harrison to Shanksville. We did an action there, right to know action, where we were able to get about 800 pages of documents, mostly mortuary records. And we were able to see the photographs of the victims, alleged victims. And those photographs were, you know, you couldn't tell it was human beings, really. It was terrible. I could recognize the palm of a hand, the ball of a foot. That was about it of the photos. And it was over, I think there's about 1,100, I guess, body bags and or files on the human remains. And what was interesting, in part, we saw that the death certificates were issued in October through a court order. In other words, there was a manifest that the United gave to the court saying these people were on the plane, and the judge ruled in the interest of the families, before DNA was done, that in fact this list is the people that were allegedly killed. And my understanding is that DNA has since confirmed it, but I'm not sure about that, and we'll be looking into that. But that was kind of interesting. We didn't know that until we looked at some of the files, that within a month they had made death certificates to certify basically the United list of passengers. Now, no hijackers or no Muslim hijackers were ID'd. All right. So that's the crime scene, and then we got, and before we leave that crime scene, just think of this, because we want to look at this, and as we will all the other crime scenes. Think of the cell phone communications. I was just on a cell phone. I was just in an airplane, and the person next to me had a cell phone. And he showed me the cell phone he had. He had no connection. He couldn't use the cell phone. He couldn't use it. So I asked him. I said, Winnie, if you can make a phone call from up here. He says, I have no ability. I'm looking at the cell phone, and he didn't have the linkage to do that. And he said, and we had been talking about 9/11. He says, I'm certainly sure that in 2001 they couldn't do it either, because we know that at least in 2001 it had to be at least anything above 8,000 feet couldn't communicate cell phone calls. And that was the government story. Now they flip-flopped a little around about that with this. Now they say it was earphones, but they're not clear on that. But they had some records of people at real high altitudes calling in. How can that be? Has it ever been challenged? Okay, Lawyers Committee would like to look into that. You may be aware of Hopkins Airport, where the planes landed there, and people were supposedly taken off one plane. One landed in one part of the airport, one on the other part. 200 people or so disappear into a hangar, an NSA hangar, I think it was, and what we found out. NASA, I'm sorry. Yeah, NASA hangar, you're right. And there's questions as to whether that's accurate or not. We actually had a person contact us from Cleveland who was intimately involved with this because she lost a family member. She says it's accurate. She said people there know that's accurate. And there's other things she told me, but I'm going to tell you right now. So there is a kind of a mystery there. There are sort of these sightings at that time of drones in the area, of E-3Bs in the area. These are doomsday planes. There was E-4B, a doomsday plane over Washington, D.C. You have talk about planes possibly being shot down. But then you also have reports we've read, confirmed, reconfirmed, and then denied of a crash near Camp David, which is heading southeast from Shanksville. So who knows what happened there? It's a strange sight. There's debris for 8 miles. And the initial people there, to a person, even state police officers, even the coroner, even the mayor, they said it doesn't look like a plane crash here. Looks like somebody took a pickup truck and dumped junk here. We're going to go down another crime scene. All right, most controversial. What caused that ball of fire there? All right. Was it an airplane, commercial size? Was it a remote commercial size airplane? Was it a missile or a cruise missile? Was it bombs? Was there a flyover? Was there a small plane involved? All of the above, none of the above. All those are theories out there. We want evidence, we want to find evidence to support the correct theory. And that is the seat of our military might there, the Pentagon. There's questions as far as the interceptions, why it wasn't intercepted, how this could happen in that space when they had so much advance notice of hijacking and crashes into the 2 buildings in New York City. How could the military be deployed out to sea? Very strange, right? But nobody's held anybody accountable. All right, anthrax, another. Now, I'm not going to go much into this because I think Barbara's going to follow up on some of this. But I live in Mercer County in New Jersey. In Mercer County, New Jersey is where the anthrax generated out of. The first letters were sent out of like Princeton area, Trenton area, Hamilton, West Windsor. So I got it's kind of home to me, New Jersey, and that was anthrax. We all forgot about that. Don't forget about it. What was that? A few days, all of a sudden now we have a Patriot Act and our freedom is being more suspended. Was that a convenience or what was that about? And again, as we talk about the government misconduct and obstruction. I mention these last crime scenes because in New York City we have, thanks to architects and engineers, we have a lot of evidence that's been gathered, and we could put it in the form of a grand jury petition. We can add to it. Currently, we're litigating that. As I said, the standing question is going to be crucial, and that'll be we'll be submitting some papers, probably certainly before the end of March, and we're in March. But the other crime scene, Shanksville and the Pentagon, that kind of study that the architects and engineers did has not been done there. What we have done, the Lawyers Committee, we've hired an investigator, one of the top, I think, in the country, and she was involved in TWA 800, and she knows Hank Hughes, who is the main whistleblower, National Transportation Safety Bureau, who reconstructed the airplane. And she's working with us now. We made good friends with some of the VIPS people. That's the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, like Bill Binney and Kurt Wiebe, Ray McGovern, Colleen Rowley, if you remember her, former FBI agent. She flagged a Moussaoui computer, but they wouldn't let her get a warrant for it. Now, with regards to misconduct and obstruction, see, we can ask, and we have to do the research to tie it into 9/11 crimes, because there's no statute of limitation on these terrorism crimes. If there's no statute of limitation, then everything has to be re-examined again as far as how you could allow this crime to even happen. Because Bill Binney says that he had a system called Thin Thread that would have detected the terrorists beforehand, but they would not let him make it operational. You have all these warnings advanced, and nevertheless it happens. And then when you investigate it, you have people that don't really investigate it, do they? They seem to do the exact opposite. The people that seem to be responsible for the sloppy, let's say, put the sloppy work, all get promoted, it seems like. So you have those areas, and now I mentioned Chris Gioia. He's going to be talking in a second. Now, Chris was, we met each other on the phone, but we met each other up in New York City at September 7th, where Chris made a very good, powerful speech to a packed audience at All Souls Church. And then Chris and I were down at the National Press Club, along with Ted Walters and Richard Gage, sorry about that, in Washington, D.C. on September 11th. And Chris and I got to walk around with Ted and Bob McIlvaine and his wife and Richard, and we went to a lot of Congress people and U.S. senators to talk about the grand jury petition and supporting a grand jury action. Now, he's going to talk to you about something really historical that his department did, or the commissioners that he's involved with, which to me is the most advanced development in 9/11, where it's going actually away from architects and engineers or pilots, and it might come back to pilots, okay, but into lawyers, and the most crucial to me is firemen, because they took it on the chin. They were really disrespected, and they were set up. Right? They set up. When they pull those buildings down, they know they're in there. Now, I just wanted you to think about when we saw those buildings go, turning into dust. There's probably at least 2,500 people in there that were turned into dust too. It's not just that there wasn't a telephone there, or an office fire, or a desk chair, as you hear some of the first responders say. There's hardly any bodies there either, or they weren't recognizable. So, again, to underline it and to think about that terrible tragedy of what we viewed, we're watching an annihilation of human beings, willful and intentional. And then we have what we described before of all the consequences of 9/11, including the constant surveillance of everything we do. And the investigation committee. There may be someone in here, or a few people that would want to get on, which I hope would be a high-powered investigation committee. I'd want you to have background in that. I think the lawyers committee. We want you to have the passion, the principles, and the seriousness to see this through. We've talked about trying to get a couple more grand jury petitions done by the end of this year. We'd like to have some results maybe within about 4 months that the committees can report back on. This is not official. This is what I'd like to see done. I'd like to see 4 more grand jury petitions before the 20th anniversary of this terrible crime. So besides in New York, we'd have grand jury going in Pennsylvania. We'd have one in Washington, D.C., maybe 2. One in the Pentagon and one in government misconduct. We have to decide whether we file on the anthrax. That's what I'd like to see. Whether that'll happen, I haven't the slightest. It really is up to people, because one is we need to get some good people dedicated. And I don't mean you don't have to have, because you've all done your research, probably, you may have a sense of what happened at a certain site. That's fine. But we all have to have the ability to examine evidence. So if something comes in that contradicts what we thought, we're willing to be flexible and maybe change our opinion. That's, I think, key. So, again, I know your group is a really a good group, and you may have somebody that wants to get in one of these committees. That's be anthrax, that'd be the Pentagon, the Shanksville, the government misconduct, and New York City for that matter, because we're still working in New York City. And as I said before, we have a really good investigator now. This was, would your government lie to you? I don't know. Do you think? I don't know. Let's see if there's any kind of official position on that.
First, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
Okay. I have a lot of other stuff I'm not going to go into. I think this was long enough. This was our first PowerPoint like this. Hopefully, it'll be better next time, and it'll be a little more organized. And I thank you for listening to it. And I think I got a lot out of it, actually. All right, to review these. And I'm not even going to do it. I was going to show you one more time that the buildings collapsed. I don't have to do that. But that sticks in my, you know, it's a point of contention in my spirit and my soul. So appreciate it. If you want to help us out financially, Lawyers Committee for FOR911.org. That is really important, because with that money, I didn't mention the FOIA campaign. This is important. In order to do our investigations, the Freedom of Information Act, it creates an ability for citizens to get some transparency for government. As Ed Asner said in the beginning of the clip, the FOIA is very important. We would like to do an aerial assault of FOIAs in the government, an aerial assault, and maybe do 40 to 50 FOIAs that are really well tailored to get the evidence we need to prove our case or to litigate it. One FOIA, we can do so many in-house, but you can only do so many in-house. We have to ship a lot of them out, probably most of them, to private attorneys. Each one of them, even if they're doing us a favor, will be somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000. You can see just if we had 20 FOIAs at $10,000, that's $200,000. If you want to take on this Goliath, that's what you have to do. That is available means to address right now. We may have to do a suit on the obstruction, because every time we do a FOIAs, they block it for some reason. It's exempt or it's not declassified. We may have to do a major lawsuit on that to force their hand. But we've made contact recently with the former FBI whistleblower, top notch, and a former attorney who lost a brother related to Oklahoma bombing. Both of them are experts on FOIA, and both of them said they would help and assist us. All right, so that's another avenue. So you can help out by just keeping the torch going, like you are now, being here, spreading the word to your friends. If you have the abilities to want to get on a committee, and the the knowledge and the background, so to speak, you're certainly pretty sure you'd be welcome. And if you have the financial ways and means, or if you know someone that does, that translates into helping the Lawyers Committee do something which no one in the country is doing. We are trying to gather the evidence beyond New York City to Pennsylvania, Washington, government misconduct, the anthrax, and to tie it all together if it can be done. And that's not an easy task. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.